Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Cohen, the author of An Introduction to the Art and Science of Chinese Tea Ceremony. Today, we're discussing Book 1, Chapter 3, Section 1, What to Make of Dragons. Here to talk about this chapter is our editorial team, Patrick Penny, Ryan Ahn, and occasional contributor Zongjun Li, joining us from Shanghai. Hello, Pat. Hello, Ryan.
Hey.
Hello.
Zongjun, happy to have you here.
Hello. My pleasure.
My first question, can you give us an example of representational art that most listeners are familiar with?
So I think most listeners, since they have some background in tea, will be familiar with calligraphy or scrolls or paintings. So within those, we see a lot of motifs. You can actually see behind me today, I have a scroll on which is peonies. So almost every flower has meaning. In Chinese culture, you'll see very specific motifs and meaning associated with flowers. Some of those are different in Western culture, but peonies, I believe, represent wealth, class, rank, or abundance as well.
What about religious art? Is there examples of religious art that readers are familiar with that have representational motifs or that allude to deeper meanings than the primary beauty?
Well, one of the more common motifs is the lotus flower, representing Buddhism. So some of the earliest examples of teaware have a lotus flower.
Dongjun, examples from religious art?
I would say in Christianity, you always see the reference of the fish, which symbolic Jehovah or Jesus. I think that's a good example.
Does the
also I want to actually echo with Patrick's reference of calligraphy in representational art, because that's actually quite different from some of the artworks, which the calligraphy, the meaning of the characters themselves are actually the most first level meaning that someone would catch. But actually the meaning, the representational context of the artwork actually hides behind the style of the stroke and sometimes the story behind where or when the calligraphy was written.
That's very interesting. Returning to something that our readers could potentially be familiar with, such as the Jesus fish. Are there examples of the Jesus fish that contain primary beauty, or is the majority of the meaning in the representational motif?
Most of the time I see it, I feel like it's just kind of a bumper sticker on the back of a car kind of thing. In that case, I would say it's really mostly representational, right? So the primary beauty of the little piece of metal or sticker on the car, the value of the primary beauty there is really nil. It's really more what it means, I think, to the people who see it and maybe have religious values that align with that symbology, or it means more to the person who has it on their car than the beauty of the piece itself.
And so where does primary beauty and motifs, where do they come into conflict, or where do they come into synergistic forms? I'm looking for examples where the sum is of the whole is greater than the addition from the parts. When you're in Europe and you walk into a church, many of the arts are large. Some of them are grand, but many would agree that the majority of the arts in the older churches of Europe tend to be beautiful. But that beauty, is it in conflict or is it synergistic with the representational motifs that it presents? So when you see Jesus dying on a cross, potentially it's beautiful, right? Potentially it's bloody and gory, but is the impact of the work greater because you know the story, or what is the conflict or the synergy between the primary visual beauty and the representational motif?
I can share a little bit here. I'm Jewish, and so being in Europe, I visited some beautiful cisterns, chapels, etc., in Hungary, Austria, France, and for me, I'll go in, see a lot of the art. If I have a good tour guide, they really help me understand some of the story. But there's not a lot of personal context there, since I don't really. I'm not really personally religious, and I wasn't raised with a Christian or Catholic background. So when I see a lot of the art, I really see more of the primary beauty, and the representational knowledge or the stories associated with it are often lost on me. A kind of juxtaposition of that is living in Japan for a while. I often visited cities like Osaka, Kyoto, and there's a lot of famous temples, particularly in Kyoto. And while I don't have a ton of background on Buddhism, except for how it touches upon tea, visiting a place like Sanju Sangendo, which is a famous temple, which has a massive hondo or main hall full of different guanyin and bodhisattvas, huge statues. I don't remember how many there quite are in the hall, but it must be about 1,000, 6 foot plus statues. And even having very little background on any of the specific guanyin or bodhisattvas that are shown there, I felt a lot more of there was a much stronger impact to me beyond just the primary beauty of the statues. There was a feeling, a presence kind of in that space. It felt like quite sacred space. And so I think they're certainly having background or understanding of the context can add a lot, but I think there's times that the space and the art itself can also shape the impression it leaves upon you.
So far, our conversation is focused on only 2 levels of beauty: primary visual beauty, and then the beauty caused by the interpretation of the motif. How does this then apply to functional wares? One of the primary sets of interests of tea practitioners is in the tea wares that we use. Many of those tea wares are inscribed with things such as dragons, as the namesake of the chapter. So when we look at functional wares, what is the interplay between its primary beauty, the way it looks, its functional beauty, the way it can be used, and its representational beauty of any motifs that are on the item? What are the synergies or the conflicts between when adding another layer, going from simply an art piece can be beautiful or not beautiful, whether or not you understand it. If you understand it, there can be representational beauty. In functional wares, there's a third layer, right? Can a unfunctional ware, a ware that should be functional, like a teapot that dribbles tea, can it be beautiful if it's lacking in function? And if it's inscribed with, say, a bamboo, right? Does that lend to a deeper meaning if the primary utility of the ware is deficient?
I think primary beauty in tea is more than just looks, right? It's the entire sensory experience. So a teapot that doesn't work, or a teacup that doesn't hold tea, you're getting just a very small slice of what it has to offer in its primary beauty. So an example I can think of a teacup that I don't think treats tea very well are the Dohua rhino horn libation cups. I think they're quite beautiful. I know there is some history associated behind it, although I actually don't know that history. Curious if you guys do. But every time I've ever had tea out of cups like that, one, it's a very unpleasant drinking experience. There is no lip whatsoever. And it, for whatever reason, that mutes the aroma. And it's not anywhere near as your standard lipped cups that are domed shape. But that's the example that immediately comes to mind where those two things are in contrast with one another.
Yeah, I think the same phenomenon applies to a lot of contemporary Yixing teapot, which artists will strive their uh, technical excellency on polishing the outlook of the teapot, but kind of ignore the actually the functional utility of the teapot being a teapot is that it needs to be uh, help to brew good tea. But a lot of those teapots, they are uh, great looking by its appearance. You see all of the small figures, like it was carved in like wood trunk shape or bamboo shape, but it really lacks the functional nature of it being a teapot to be used in a tea ceremony.
So would it be fair to characterize our position that function takes precedence over primary beauty or representational beauty in the assessment of functional wares?
I think as we're in the space of tea, the pieces of art that we use are meant to be functional. Right, this teaware is meant to be functional. So I think that's its number one purpose. That is its primary beauty, is how functional it is.
Any dissenting opinions?
I think that sometimes you really need to take a broader view of utensils or objects being used in different scenarios. For example, ding. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this kind of utensil. In the very early age, ding was used as a kitchenware. It was used to cook large chunk of meat, but it later on evolves into a symbol of authority, especially imperial authority. So its representational or secondary value transcends its functionality for it to begin with. So I think that will be an example of that.
How do the levels of practice play into your ability to assess the utility of functional wares? Particularly, I'm thinking about wares that might be more difficult to use, that lower level practitioners might claim are non-functional or less functional because of their difficulty, while higher level practitioners might, having had the experience of using them repeatedly, would be able to achieve better results. How does that assessment play into the evaluation of aware?
So I think at the utilitarian level, you're going to be looking for wares that are, at the base level of experience needed for use. So your easy gaiwans, or maybe hohin, right, like the Japanese shibori dashi, kyusu, or things that can really easily be held, aren't going to burn you, are kind of easy to control the pour. And as you improve, I think once you hit that structural functionalist stage, you're starting to think a little bit more about the way that your wares are impacting your brewing. And so that's when I feel like a lot of brewers start to look out to, new wares to help with their brewing. And that's when I think we start to have this intersection of skill and functionality of ware, as well as its beauty, or its representational beauty as well. I think in a concrete example of a ware that I have is I have a Shanto little teapot. So it's not Yixing, Shanto clay. The shape is suting, so it's quite pear-shaped, and there's a spout that comes from the bottom and goes up, and the top of the spout for the pot that I have is just below the level where the lid would sit, which means that if I tip the pot too fast, water is going to try and actually come out from the lid before it makes it out through the spout. So there's quite a lot of timing involved, and there needs to be a bit of precision on how quickly you accelerate the pot to make sure that water doesn't come out of the lid, but will come out of the spout and not dribble down. I think it's a beautiful piece of art as far as the teapot itself, the look of the ware. The shape obviously has some representational meaning. But if you were to just pick that up as your first teapot, you'd find it just frustrating. And I do have teapots that are frustrating. And you really would miss out, I think, on the the beauty of the ware in the way that it can shape the tea, the effect, right, it has on the flavor of the tea, and how beautiful of a functional item it can be if you don't have the right experience to use it.
It was a really interesting question, Jason, originally, and I was actually really struggling to come up with an example of an implement that was really only used by high-level practitioners. So it's interesting that Pat very much gave an example that was design focused, because when I was originally thinking through that, it was actually the removal of things. You know, advanced practitioners are not using filters to filter out the little findings. You know, they're going to probably remove the Winchong bays at some point if they're using that, or all those stupid little tweezer things that people use to lift up the cup, Gongdao bays as well, or fairness pitchers. So there's a lot of removal of things. So I was really struggling to come up with something. And I think that it's so much more subtle, as Pat said. I mean, that is something that's, you know, most people wouldn't think of until you've brewed a lot of tea and from a lot of vessels, about the level and the height of the spout from the top of the pot. So I thought that was a great example. I thought of another one too, being the length of the phalange on the teapot lid can have a really great effect, and that could also be quite frustrating if you didn't understand the implications of that, especially the type of tea being used and the way you're misdosing it, right? Because if you have a lot of volume of tea in that pot and a very long phalange, it's actually going to press down on that tea. It's non-obvious, and sometimes it's a great effect and sometimes it's not. And you just have to live through enough experiences to understand how and why.
And to have enough access to, I would say, like pre-80s teapots that have these really long tangs or flanges, which, you know, you're lucky if you do. But I would also just kind of add a little bit onto this conversation that I think experience does play a really large role in understanding the primary beauty of wares. I've often, just like with the previous teapot that I gave as an example, often when I receive a teapot, the first thing I do is kind of think about all the ways that the teapot is letting me down. So I'm seeing dribbles here. You know, it doesn't pour cleanly. The pour is a little too long. And what it really, I think, comes down to is, you know, shifting your mindset a little and seeing how that teapot can teach you, right, to be a better brewer. So I often try and approach new wares and see how, you know, does this ware want to be used? And do I have the technique or time, right, to get to a point where I can use it and it affects my tea in the way that I'm looking for? And sometimes, certainly, there's wares that just know they're actually improperly made. And no matter how much practice goes into trying to pour well with it or use it properly, it's not going to get there. But often, I think it's a matter of experience. And with time and practice, most wares can get to a point where you can use them beautifully.
There's no poor wares, only poor practitioners.
Exactly.
That's why I brew out of my Hello Kitty teapot. We have been focusing on teapots, Yixing and Santal, in the last few minutes of the conversation. That's an interesting choice when discussing representational motifs, because the majority of teapots that we see high-level practitioners using have no motifs on them. The Yixings are blank. Smooth surfaces, smooth bodies, or the sought-after pear skin, shark skin textures. What is the editorial team's opinion both on Yixings or Santal with representational motifs? Why don't we see more Yixings or teapots with representational motifs on them? And where do we see high-level practitioners opting for items with teapots with representational motifs?
Actually, I think I disagree with you. Even the most simple shapes that seemingly don't have any motifs, you'll see various human forms or other forms, right? So the shape of the handle is often in the shape of a human ear, or sometimes the spout could be in the shape of what looks like a leg. So even in the most mundane looking teapots, there is hidden symbolism. And then, of course, on the other side of that, Yixing pottery is a very long history of motifs and strange shapes that date back quite far, whether or not it looks like it's made of bamboo or a gourd or that type of thing.
Two things there. First, I'm willing to believe that you judge the beauty of Madonna on the rocks based on the shape of her legs, but I'm less willing to believe that you judge her beauty based on the shape of her ear. Can you say that the Yixing teapot is beautiful because the handle does such a good job of representing the human ear?
I think that finding a great example of it is kind of difficult. So once you know where to look for it, when you see a particularly good example, it to me shows a sign of quality and intention that you wouldn't see in a mass market ware.
Ryan, on that same topic, you said that you believe that high-level practitioners are using Yixings with motifs in the shape of a stump or the shape of a bamboo. But I do not see those as being particularly common. Does the editorial team think that individual high-level practitioners are opting for those Yixings, or are they trying to opt for them but they can't find them? I see them as much less common than the F1 Yixings, the basic geometric shapes.
Yeah, I would say that it's not something that we see a ton from high-level practitioners. I don't think it means that it's not out there, and I don't think people aren't seeking them out. I think they're often seen more as, specifically certain ones are seen more as art pieces than they are as pieces to be used, which I find unfortunate. We've had the good fortune to, I'd say, try out about 2 or 3 different stump teapots with motifs that date back to the Qing Dynasty. And all of them have had quite good effect on tea. Most of these teapots, I would say Yixings with motifs, are often quite large. And so they lend themselves to more of this, I would say, kind of Ming Dynasty lineage of tea brewing, of quite large volume of tea, large ware, drinking maybe out of bigger cups. They're not quite, I would say, shaped for Gongfu tea as we think of it, kind of the Qing lineage more so of tea, where we're using smaller wares, smaller pots, higher dosing. So I think often what you're seeing from maybe visual mediums, right, where practitioners are showing off pincha setups, these motif pots aren't going to fit it because they're just too big for the kind of brewing ratios that we think are high level today.
Dongjun, do you see differences in that in the high-level practitioners in China? Do you see high-level practitioners using the stump or the bamboo-shaped teapots?
Quite rarely, actually. It's a bamboo-shaped teapot are usually meant to, demonstrate the artistic excellency of a teapot maker rather than to be meant to be a good value brewing vessel for tea practitioner.
Now, I'm a fan of teapots, and particularly also a fan of non-Yixing teapots, things like Jingdezhen teapots. The classic blue and white Jingdezhen teapots do tend to be on the larger side, although they do tend to be appropriate for Gongfu in contemporary practice, but we don't see them very often, and they contain representational motifs. Why do you think that contemporary practitioners are so focused on the dichotomous choice between Yixing and Gaiwan when it's really a false dichotomy? Why don't we see more beautiful painted non-Yixing teapots available and in use?
I would just add in, I don't think you're scrolling Instagram enough, Jason. I think there's quite a lot of I would say regional potters. So maybe not particularly famous, but we're seeing a lot of European and American potters that are making teapots out of local clays, right, for Gongfu use in their local markets. Additionally, right, we're both quite fond of Korean tea wares, and there's certainly a lot of both clay and glazed porcelains available from Korea that aren't your traditional ware. So I would say there is a lot out there, but certainly the porcelain, or more so I would even say Gaiwan versus Yixing dichotomy, I certainly do feel it does exist. I think a lot of people see high-level practitioners using Yixing, and they want to mirror that in their own practice earlier than maybe they are ready to do. And so we have a lot of people skipping over porcelain brewing phase. So whether that's a teapot or a gaiwan. And I think that is quite sad, because I think it's very important to learn the flavor of the tea without any impact from porous wares. Not that the size or the shape of a porcelain ware won't impact the tea itself, but certainly before adding that layer of tertiary pore structures and porosity, it's really good to understand, what does a tea taste like in porcelain. As I said, I think the dichotomy exists, but maybe nowadays we're seeing more and more people reach out for different kinds of wares. So maybe that dichotomy will look different in the future.
I think a lot of people have the mindset that they either want it to be neutral in a vessel that they know very well, such as a gaiwan. And gaiwans, you also have a lot of control over the flow rate. You can make the tea, you can decant the tea basically as fast or as slow as you want. Whereas in a porcelain teapot, you cannot. So in general, you have a little more control over the brewing process. But if you have the intention then of introducing another effect, most people, I think, just jump straight to Yixing because it's what's so well known. And I have nothing against porcelain teapots, but there's certainly a functional difference. It's rate limiting because it's single spout. You can't control the diameter of where the tea exits. And some teas just don't taste good in porcelain teapots. I've had really good, like Lapsang Souchong style tea from porcelain teapots, or Oriental Beauty. But if you try to brew an aged sheng in a porcelain teapot, I think you could get a better effect faster if you were brewing it in a gaiwan than figuring out how to dial that in a porcelain teapot.
Zongjun, do you see any differences of that in current contemporary mainland Chinese practice?
I have nothing else to add.
As impractical and kind of awful gaiwans are as a brewing vessel, one of the greatest things is that you have so much control, which I think is often underappreciated, because you can get liquid in and out of it basically at any rate that you want if you're a good brewer.
I do think they are the ultimate tool, but I don't quite have your same stance on porcelain teapots. I think mine aligns a little bit more with Jason's, where I actually love the effect that porcelain teapots have for most teas. However, often finding them in a size appropriate for the kind of brewing I'm trying to do is difficult. So I have like maybe a 140 or 150 milliliter porcelain pot, which is just a little too big for drinking tea by myself or with my partner. So as far as like using them as a brewing tool, I like them almost as much as gaiwans, aside from the few points that you had mentioned, Ryan.
And
although it's quite rare actually to see high tea practitioners using porcelain teapots in China. I also think there is another layer of implication that porcelain teapots being inferior in terms of quality than Yixing teapot in a lot of scenarios, because you often see porcelain teapot being used in restaurants or like canteens, but you rarely see this utensil being used in a tea ceremony.
Does your porcelain teapot have a representational motif on it?
No, completely blank. So beyond its shape, there's no deeper meaning. And this is certainly one where I wouldn't side with Ryan's argument of the beautiful ear or spout, though I do agree that many Yixings do have beautiful shapes. This is quite neutral.
And aside of shapes, you sometimes will see porcelain teapot or Yixing teapot being inscribed with a heart sutra. So that's actually more common in southern China, and I think it has a lot of Buddhism implication behind it. And southern China being the more Buddhism influenced region in China, which you will see that kind of wares more often than other regions.
So here's a non-Yixing teapot with certainly a representational motif. Any feelings on this teapot, or anyone want to describe it?
It's definitely not the Jesus fish.
No, not the Jesus fish.
The teapot, to be clear, is in the shape of a fish with an open mouth and a long tail that comes up and acts as its handle.
I think it's a Chinese koi. And, like in legends, they will say koi fish will jump out of the water and will evolve into a dragon when the time comes. So I think that might be an implication of that legend.
I think you're certainly right. And I don't know if it was knowing the story or what, but I did choose to use this for oolongs. I will say it's not doesn't do great things to tea. So its functional beauty isn't quite there, although it is quite easy to hold. The pour is nice. I think it's just a Taiwanese local clay, and it doesn't do amazing things to tea. I think it had something to do with a holiday. I don't quite remember which holiday it was. Maybe it was Dragon Boat, but it had some ties to a holiday. But I received it for free from a vendor that we all know, and I'm grateful for the present. At the very least, it's a good way to understand how your clay impacts your tea.
The last place I want to bring the conversation is to how individual practitioners can learn the meaning behind representational motifs. So I'm going to pose a challenging question to each of you on the editorial team. It is just past cicada season. We had a wonderful experience with Brood X. And so, Pat, starting with you, what does the cicada represent in Chinese motifs?
I'm not super familiar with it in Chinese motifs, but I did live in Japan for a while. And from what I understand in Japanese culture and when it's represented in motifs, it often has to do with like rebirth or renewal. And I assume it's pretty close in Chinese. There might be some small differences. What it means to me is that I'm going to be woken up at like 5 or 6 a.m. by the most annoying and terrible sound I know on this planet.
Cicada in Chinese is Chan, and it's a homophone of Zhen, the character. So that's a very common representational motif in a lot of Zen-related utensils or paintings in China.
The reason that I bring this up is because interpreting and understanding representational motifs, or even the ability to learn about the meaning of representational motifs, can be quite limited. It's quite difficult. And so here I'll reference Therese Say Bartholomew's Hidden Meaning in Chinese Art, and read out her explanation of the meaning of a cicada. So cicada, as Zongjun said, is pronounced Chan, and she writes, "The cicada is a symbol of cyclical resurrection. It lives a long life from 13 to 17 years. Jade cicadas were once placed in the mouths of the dead as amulets because they symbolized immortality. Later, the jade cicada became an ornament for the hats of gentry, for it represented an honest man of principle. The artist Jason Cohen, who lived from 1905 to 1998, was fond of painting the cicada because it perched on the highest branch of a tree and imbibed only dew. He felt that it had integrity, like men who would rather be poor than compromise themselves in seeking riches and fame." So, Pat, seemed like your definition was closest.
What do I win?
Social capital, cultural capital, status-seeking behavior.
All right. Well, if anyone's read the book, they can figure out how to convert that into other forms of capital.
Pat will accept your donations. So I bring this up not to you pose an impossible question, but to show that even very high-level educated practitioners, right, can both can make interpretations. Sometimes those interpretations or assessments can be correct, and that they could also make new connections, as Zongjun did, outside of the standard interpretations. So how is it possible, right? The four of us on this call, I did not know what a cicada represented in Chinese art prior to reading this. And how, if we struggle to know and to understand and to interpret, how can other practitioners learn to do so, right? Where is it that they can gain the knowledge of representational motifs in order to actually appreciate the tertiary beauty of these wares and symbols?
Yeah, so just as the one who got it closest, I'll point out that that was just a good lucky guess for me, having some lived background, right, in a region with some similar motifs as China. But this is an ongoing thing for me. I've been practicing tea for 10 years, but I would say that my background in just Chinese history, Chinese culture, is really quite limited to tea. And so I would say even just in the past year or two, I've been trying to study a little bit more about Chinese history, trying to, push myself to learn more about some of these motifs, study some well-known Chinese art. And so it really does come down to trying to read books, right? Expose yourself to articles. These are the things that, even high-level practitioners still need to do to this day, especially I would say Western practitioners who weren't raised with a lot of this cultural understanding. So it's really a pursuit of, self-refinement, continuing to learn and learn and learn. You don't need to know them all. And Jason, I think you pointed out something really nice is that you can make connections for these motifs to your personal lived experience or your own life. It doesn't have to tie back directly to a clean historical tie. So I would say try and link motifs to something that's important to you.
I would say learning the language of the culture of your interest will certainly be very helpful as well, particularly to Japanese and Chinese, because a large chunk of the language or the characters of these language are ideograms, which the language themselves have representational values or beauties as they evolve in history.
Dongjun, how good is the knowledge of representational Chinese motifs in China amongst your friends and educated people?
I would say it's very high. Actually, a lot of these motifs are very deeply rooted in daily culture, like festivals and all the 对联 or the patterns that we will put out to our windows or doorset during spring festivals. You would put the happiness upside down to symbolize the happiness is coming into your home, because upside down, the character Dao is a homophone of coming. So all of these representational motifs or beauty are actually part of our daily life.
So why is it important, Jason, to understand these tertiary layers, right? This representational beauty for a practitioner of Gongfu Jia?
That is a great question. At the utilitarian level, it is not. At the structural functionalist level, it might not be. But in order to practice tea at the phenomenist level, in order to be able to communicate your skill, in order to be able to communicate and to draw inspiration from the knowledge of your guests, having the knowledge of these representational motifs adds another language in which to communicate what you wish to achieve within the Chinese tea praxis. And beyond the direct application of that knowledge within the praxis, in order to be able to identify, in order to be able to collect and understand and use many of the antique wares that higher level practitioners prefer, knowledge and understanding of the representational motifs is necessary. There's beyond there being any number of fakes on the market that individuals will tell you are Ming Dynasty, right? Being able to actually understand and see, the number of claws the dragon has on the cup, if they're telling you it's the material ware. Being able to understand that the black crow became extraordinarily popular as both an imperial and a literati ware during the Yongzhen emperor's reign. Those types of things allow you to pick out what is special, what is real, what is a preference that has historical antecedents that are still impacting the practices today. So is it possible to become a great tea brewer with no knowledge of representational techniques? Absolutely. Is it possible to create a beautiful chashi without knowing that you're mixing a cicada, which is a homophone of Zen, and a saucer that represents a Confucius-style hat, and that those two things might be considered clashing? Absolutely. So, at any level of practice, it is possible to better understand and more deeply communicate your intentions with the knowledge of these representational motifs, and it will help you in your teaware identification, sourcing, and selection. It will help you in your chashi creation, and it will help you in your ability to understand and identify and link information back to each other as you learn more about the historical practice and the way that arose the contemporary practice.
So I think that's a great answer, and it kind of shows every practitioner, right, that we have something to strive for. Even if you brew amazingly, there's still more that you can learn. So hopefully improve your practice. I was thinking, outside of the traditional motifs, which are on most of our wares, almost all of our wares have a lot of traditional motifs. How can we instill, the tea experiences we provide for other people, whether that's our chashi or whatnot, with maybe personally connected motifs that are outside of the traditional culturally linked or Chinese, right, motifs?
I do think we see that already. Individuals using band T-shirts as a chabu, or contemporary wares that are painted with English words instead of Chinese words, to think of a currently popular example. These are, those are a mix of wares that were made for tea and wares that weren't made for tea. Lots of individuals are using obi belts, Japanese kimono belts, as chabus. Well, what is the difference if you were to use your favorite band T-shirt or album cover, right, as a chabu? One of the things that I've seen you do, Pat, is a cigar box chashi from some of your collected cigars. I think that probably has a lot of cultural cachet with certain individuals that are better able to differentiate Cohiba and I can't think of another cigar brand. So it shows my cultural capital in this area.
I think I opted for a Padron box.
I would like a Davidoff.
So I do think that the integration of contemporary wares, contemporary preferences, contemporary items and motifs is prevalent and becoming more prevalent, particularly as we gain increasing distance from the past. And speaking of contemporary Western preferences, for Pat and Ryan, followed by a Chinese variation from Zhongzhen, we will end this segment on our favorite reoccurring theme, hot takes. Ryan, I think we're going to need some theme music in the future for hot takes.
A little spicy, fiery background noise.
Pat, what is your favorite Chinese motif?
I've got it in the background here, but peonies, you've probably seen my blue gaiwan as well, which actually is just next to me. This is my most used gaiwan. Has a little bit of a peony motif on it. I think a lot of my wares actually that I end up buying, whether or not I knew it when I bought them, I end up gravitating towards peonies. It's one of my favorite flowers.
Ryan, what is your favorite representational motif? Chinese.
I don't have a good answer. Most of my wares don't have motifs. I don't know.
That is a good answer. Hashtag relatable.
Yeah, I don't know. Double happiness. So a lot of my tea aging jars have that. I don't know if that counts as a motif.
Doesn't that symbolize marriage?
I think a lot of things.
Well, it's you and the tea aging happily together.
Zongjun, you are, of course, Chinese. What is your favorite motif?
That's a hard choice to pick a favorite motif. Maybe I'll pick bamboo because for a lot of the literati reference of bamboo being its shape is very straight. That's a great character of being straightforward, and also the inner side of bamboo is empty. That symbolizes humbleness of being a tea practitioner or learner, everlasting learner in this journey, always to be humble and always to respect other people, and always to keep a humble position to accept new knowledge and changes, because tea ceremony is a living art and ever-changing art.
Very deeply intertwined with tea. If we think of like the Julin Qishan, right, the seven sages of the bamboo grove, and just how bamboo just touches upon everything in tea.
Yeah.
My favorite, for the record, is the dragon and phoenix chasing a flaming pearl. I didn't always love that motif, but that has somewhat recently become my favorite, and I've begun purposely attempting to collect wares with that motif.
And I believe the dragon and the phoenix together also represent marital, matrimonial happiness, which Jason, I know you and Nancy are going vegetarian, but
it's a very big commitment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think of it as emperor and empress, and and Nancy from rural Fuzhou, so this is quite a step up in relative status. The second hot take question is, what is your favorite Western motif? Zongjun, this time starting with you.
I think my favorite Western motif is the infinity snake. The name is called Ouroboros, I think, which symbolize infinity and timeless.
Does it remind you of the Zen circle?
Yes, it does.
Ryan?
I work in product development, and one of my favorite motifs is the broomstick outside of a door, outside of a brewery or a bar. It's the way that the monks used to inoculate new batches with the old yeast. It was that symbolism. So mixture between fermentation and food and beverage product development. I think, and it's also totally functional. So I think that's my favorite.
I'm struggling here, Jason. I think maybe I want to hear yours, and that might help me rattle my mind.
My favorite is, unfortunately, the male bathroom symbol, because it doesn't matter where in the world you are, when you gotta go, that is a symbol from God.
I'll tell you, in rural Korea, not the time that I was there with you, Jason, but more recently, I was at a factory, a tea factory for work, and the bathrooms didn't have the picture, my pictograph, right, male and female. It said it, in Korean alphabet, right, Hangul, men and women, and I can't read it. And now I can because that was an important learning. But favorite motif, does the Route 66 sign count? I feel like I really love the idea of like being out on the roads that stretch on forever. I think it's kind of this start of the journey, middle of the journey, never ending journey. There's something about motifs that have to do with travel that I really like.
Well, that concludes this episode of T-Technique Editorial Conversations. Thank you for joining us, everyone. And please join us again for the next discussion on the chapter Use, Disuse, and the Experience of Meaning.